Hey, Luis.
Hey, all
How's it going,
timers.
Luis?
How about that?
How are you, man?
I'm good to see you.
Good to see you. It's been a long time.
You
Yeah,
guys know each other, right?
Yeah, for
yes.
many years ago,
Back in the days.
back in the old
Yeah,
days,
back
Morgan
in
Stanley days. It began, yeah, and then Tree Capital as well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Good to see you.
Luis, thank you very much for
for helping me out.
joining us today. What we normally do is because even though we all know each other, the audience doesn't know. I give a little bio, and then we could just start chatting. So let's start, Luis. Again, Luis Carvalho. Thanks again for coming. You are a partner at Winston Capital Advisors in New York and Miami. You obviously you can tell us a little more about that, but you're advising individual wealth management clients and small institutions, family offices on like the capital markets. You began your career, obviously, I think at J.P. Morgan, and then quickly rose into equity analyst position at Morgan Stanley. I believe you covered the telecom industry
That's very right.
very well, if I remember correctly. And then you spent time as the head of Latin American capital markets during what I think the last kind of boom time we had in Latin America,
Exactly.
IPO boom time from
Exactly.
2006 and 2008. And then you went to the buy side, as a lot of us have been on, with Tree. You were the founder and portfolio manager and analyst for Tree Capital, which is an EM, Latin focus, but an EM emerging markets long short fund. That was you had a nice run there, about I think about 7 or 8 years, and then consequently joining Winston Capital Advisors, and I guess we'd like to hear just from your perspective. Give us an idea of what Winston does. And I spoke to your partner Fabian a few years ago, so I had a little understand. But tell us about Winston Capital, what they stand today, what they do, and then we could just go from there.
Fabian, I'm glad you mentioned Fabian. He's the founder of Winston Capital, and it's a firm that essentially does financial advisory for mainly Latin American families and Latin American businesses and Latin American people who want to, for a good reason, to diversify out of the region and invest globally, and we help them. By helping people, we sometimes help businesses that also need all different types of transactions and help in specific issues. And considering that Fabian and I have different skill sets, so we can cover a lot of ground by helping families. But I think that on a day-to-day basis, what we mostly help is advising on what we like, what we don't like, and why, and what sectors, companies, or countries we like more than not. Our main focus is, I would say, developed markets, although our clients are in emerging markets, so we cover a lot of ground.
That's great. That's so we can talk about that in more detail later. It'd be interesting to see how you view the world and so forth. I wanted to start by reminding you of something. It's always I think about this quite often actually. I think we had a meeting like around I think it may have been the Telespi IPO, 1998. And I remember you came to my office and you gave me these projections, and it was basically that cell phone service was gonna rapidly grow in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, and you had these numbers which I think you had like numbers were going to double over the next 5 years or something. And I remember telling you, Luis, you're crazy. What is this nonsense? Where do you get these numbers? You're just trying to sell this IPO, and I always think about that because I was, so incredibly wrong. They didn't double. They went up by 20 times, right?
Yeah, I was wrong too. It makes
you were completely wrong. You were completely wrong. You had the numbers doubling, and they ended up like going up 10 times.
Exactly.
So that by 10 years, I think your forecasts were for 10 years or something, and you had them, a bit more than doubling over 10 years, and they're like up 10 times over 10 years. But so I remember always like, I was a stupid, arrogant portfolio manager, and I gave you such a hard time. But then what's really incredible about that is that if I believed your numbers, and or if I had the real numbers, what actually turned out to be in terms of subscriptions, I would have been incredibly bullish. I mean, I would
This
this
is long
would be my
again, right?
largest position, right?
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. So what actually the IPO of Telespi Cellular was pretty much the peak of the stock. No, I think it actually went up, like it may have gone up, I think it IPO'd at 40 and it went up to 150 or something. But you know where the stock is today? It's at $12.
Yeah, it's
So,
incredible.
and they had like 1.5 million subscribers. Now they probably have 100 million or something. And so it's just, I always think about that. Well, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to make projections, and it's so difficult to identify, what kind of value creation will occur. And so I wanted to just remind you of this, so you could tell us about your experience in the telecom sector, what you learned, and how and your understanding of how all this happened and where we are today and so forth.
It's incredible, right? We've been wrong but not in the way we thought we would be wrong. It's in a different way. And I think these days with AI, with artificial intelligence, uh, I'm not alone in actually going back to those days of the boom in telecom, the boom in internet, and drawing a lot of parallels between what has happened then and what's happening now, where I don't know if you remember, there was a massive amount of capital being deployed, not only in Brazil, but everywhere in the world. It was in wireless, in frequency, in cables, and fiber optic, in digitalization, and cable TV. Everything was
And
being
paying huge amounts for
licensed.
the licenses, enormous amounts. That's one of the reasons that it didn't go very well, right?
Exactly. So there's a lot of things to contrast and compare, but the amount of capital chasing a sector, right? And as you said, to a certain degree, it worked better than everybody was expecting. But there was more use. The internet and telecom services became absolutely crucial in today's economy. If we were measuring by the use, we would say, wow, Telespi will be at $40,000, not 12, right? Because it's the amount of usage has increased a lot. But the beneficiaries were not the telecom companies. There were the Amazons, the Netflixes, the Googles of the world. Those are the ones who actually capitalized and monetized the investment in infrastructure. None of these companies would have existed without the investment that was made back then when you and I were looking at the Telespi numbers.
What
And
you're
that
saying
is
really is that Brazil wasn't unique, that none of these cell phone franchises really turned out to be profitable, right? I mean, look at Verizon stock, it's also like at the levels of 20 years ago, right?
exactly. There was essentially was a sector that, I mean, if you think from a technical point of view, more technological point of view, I'm sorry, is the digitalization quickly in communications quickly moved into this packet-based networks that is essentially the internet. And once communications becomes or communication is essentially communicating in internet, everything on the internet is an app. Amazon is an app. Netflix is an app. WhatsApp is an app. So everything became telephone is an app. Telephony is, as you know, I don't have a telephone line in my house for, I mean, maybe 8, 10 years. I actually now don't have even a broadband line. It's a wireless broadband that connects to the Wi-Fi. So why is this interesting? Is because it's about capital discipline, and where we are going from here, right? Telecom was essentially a success in terms of its growth and its ubiquity, but it was a disaster in terms of return for the guys who actually deploy the capital. I mean, think about in the US how many companies have gone bankrupt. In Brazil, Oi has more or less gone bankrupt. I don't know if they have already buried the body, but I mean, it's dead for a while. So it's unique, right? It's fascinating. I think it's fascinating, and I think there is a lot of parallels with AI today, where there is a same thing happening.
The winners in Brazil were the governments that got tons of money for the licenses, and the customers, and the customers that got very cheap phones and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. You remember? I remember when I used to call my parents in Brazil, and it would cost me a fortune per minute. And today, the cost is very much close to zero for a video call or indefinite time. So it was a success, but it wasn't monetary. For investments was terrible. And I don't know if there is a way out of it for the telecom companies, because they are not even an app. They are providers of an infrastructure that is, if the world is still so overbuilt, that I don't know if they will ever get out of it.
Still overregulated, right? The governments are all over them, and
Yeah,
it's
it's complicated, and they try to into content, both in the U.S. and in Latin America. You remember Televisa tried to move into content, and in the U.S. Verizon tried to. It never worked. It's a completely different business, so telecom companies, it didn't work. It didn't work. It's a disaster, unfortunately, and very little way out of it. Just
yeah. Like I think what same thing is happening in Brazil in terms of this disintermediation in the media industry. Where like when I lived in Brazil in the 80s and 90s, like Globo was all powerful, right? Just completely dominant, and every family was in front of their TV at night watching the telenovela, and it was something that really unified the country, because the maids were watching it, the rich people were watching it, and it was a national thing. You went everywhere in Brazil and they were watching it. And today, people are watching Netflix, they're watching Disney, they're watching anything. So
or they're going to the internet and watching YouTube and
they're
all
watching YouTube, and that must be really disunifying for a country like Brazil. No, it eliminates something that was that everybody had in common.
That's very true. I think it's a worldwide phenomenon, but in Brazil is extremely pronounced, this effect, right? Where you don't have a unified voice. Or you remember Jornal Nacional, the still important thing, the news after kind of a dinner.
Everybody watched it, right?
Yeah. So you were essentially informed by the 3 or 4 newspapers and that. And today, their market share of information, how you get information, is probably have gone down to collectively 30%. I don't know, but it's a huge decline, not from 100 to 30 to 70, but 100 to 30%, right? So it's a massive change.
So it creates the same political fragmentation that you have in the U.S.
Exactly.
Where people get all their news from, whatever social media that they like.
Yeah, and you combine the effect that exactly the same thing happened in the U.S. In Brazil, it happened later, but you have the Fox News effect initially, right, where someone with a strong political position is able to get a lot of market share, and that causes the other side to kind of polarize the other way. So you have a kind of the media that was built to be a middle class, middle of the road type of person in the 60s, 70s, and up to the 80s in the US. It's not anymore. Become a polarized media, the traditional media, and then the same thing goes with a vengeance on the internet, to the social media. So it becomes very, very polarized. I see that happening in Latin America, but I see happening in Brazil too. The polarization is here to stay, very hard. And with the polarization comes also the kind of a populism, right? It's sort of a new populism that is affecting politics. So it's a long story. It's very interesting. I don't think we know how this will evolve yet.
I imagine also people don't read newspapers in Brazil anymore, right? If they're getting their news from TikTok, from
just to put some numbers. You remember the Veja magazine?
Sure, absolutely.
Veja magazine at its peak was a million per week. It was a weekly magazine with 1 million. Today, it's like less than 10% of that. The newspapers, when I this is back 30 years ago, was we're having the Sunday issues were 1 million. Estadão Sunday issue was 1 million. Today, you barely break 100,000 in total circulation for the main newspapers, so Folha, Estado, and Globo. And if they try to move to the web, by moving to the web, you have to compete with X and all the other guys. So it's essentially breaking that model. I think that model is probably broken. It has a lot of consequences. It has a lot of consequences for political discourse, how you run campaigns, how you communicate today. You see Trump, essentially, if you don't follow X or if you don't follow social media, you don't know what's going on. The main source of information is is the announcements, right, or the tweets. It's crazy.
So Luis, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I think that obviously your firm is one of the beneficiaries. Here you have an independent advisory, you have a voice, you use social media, you send out newsletters, and people, again, because of this fractured media has fractured, information has fractured. Tell us how you talk about your company and how you're sort of taking advantage of that, and why do you think your clients are like going to you? I think it's an obvious answer, but let's hear what you're from a business standpoint, how you're taking advantage of this.
Well, to be very frank, I think these tools are very important for communication. It makes communication very cheap. Well, you guys know what we're doing here. The actual marginal cost of putting this together is extremely low. 20 years ago, it cost us a fortune, right? We didn't think about doing anything like that. So it facilitates communication tremendously and information flow, etc. But the difficulty is everything is a little niche, right? It is not Winston cannot have the breadth of a large organization, because that requires a lot of distribution and different things. So I think the market becomes more niche, and the people who like us really do. They value a lot what we do. They value the direct connectivity. And one thing that I believe that the fact that especially the Brazilians that I'm more closely to are slowly, very slowly, but finally moving into more international investments, right? A lot of the portfolios, is common to have portfolios now with 20% of international allocation. It looks very little, but it was almost non-existent a while ago. So we cater to those guys who are more interested in investing outside of Brazil. And we think you can have add some value there, more so than the big shop. The big shop normally is a different thing, right? The big shop has a different strengths and weaknesses. We can be a little bit more customized and more focused. And Fabian does a phenomenal job in leading that effort. He brings very good relationships from Morgan Stanley, where I was always more in the institutional side, but Fabian has done his career entirely on wealth management, so he knows the stuff well. He knows a lot of people, and so we can add value. We don't have a lot of clients, but the clients that we have, they really like us.
So Luis, it used to be quite difficult to take your money out of Brazil if you wanted to invest 20% in foreign stocks. What changed exactly that now it's actually quite easy, right?
Yeah, well, compared to before, it's extremely easy. Now, not only they have ETFs locally, but they have these firms. I think Avenue's one of them, right? That made it very easy. Obviously, I'm not talking about big. If you hire JP Morgan or UBS, yes, if you have many millions of dollars, right? But I'm talking about the not so rich guys, right? Now it's a lot easier to have some money outside, to have $200,000, $300,000 out, and or $1 million or $2 million, and from sitting in Sao Paulo without doing anything very complicated. All the other firms like BTG and XP, they all can do that a lot better. So, but the thing for the client in Brazil is still the attractiveness of the local rates, right? When you think that you can get inflation plus 7 or 8 with government paper, it's a hard thing to compete, right? It's a hard thing to compete. It's still more the diversification story rather than a return, right? So, but you never know. But I believe if we continue to see rates that high, real rates that high in Brazil, it will be very hard for significantly more money to get out.
Because when you talk to wealthy people in Brazil, with interest rates this high, obviously there's less incentive to be taking risk in the stock market. From a local perspective, what do you think is going to change to get them to sort of reverse? Is it going to be just one cut? Is it going to have to be a series of cuts over time? What are you looking for? What are your clients thinking about when to return to the stock market?
I think it's a lot of the curve, right? If you look at the interest rate curve in Brazil, you have to see that curve, especially the longer end, being brought down significantly. The curve in Brazil is strange. It's not exactly a curve. It's more or less like a flat line. Yeah, there is a little bit of a variation, but the flat line is very high. So if you can get 15-year rates at inflation plus 7 or so. I mean, honestly, what type of return in the world will get inflation plus 7 for a long period of time? It's difficult. So if your liabilities are in reais, if your life is in local currency, it's very hard for you to move away because then you have a mismatch of currency. So from an asset liability at a personal level, you don't want to be very mismatched. So my interpretation is a lot of the allocation outside is capital protection and a little bit of diversification, right? So yeah, if Lula wins, then I make some money if the currency devalues, but their lives is in Brazil. But answering directly to your question, what would make Brazilians change is the curve going down, as we saw in the Sarney era, right? If you see a government winning, it's not so much the local rate, the Selic rate coming down, which obviously is necessary, but it's the longer end of the curve coming down. If you go from, let's say, inflation plus 7 to inflation plus 4, which is a very reasonable, very attractive long-term rate, I think that will not only the fixed income becomes less interesting, but the impact on the profits of the companies and the impact on the stock market could be huge. That's why we haven't talked about that yet, but I'm marginally positive on Brazilian stock market because I think there is a real possibility that if Lula doesn't win the election, the curve adjusts for a government that is more fiscally responsible. Do you know what I mean? I think the Sarney years is a good example. Right? When Sarney took over and announced what was the name of the thing? The Fiscal Responsibility Act. I forgot the name of the, but it's essentially capping expenses at inflation. Forgot the name in Portuguese. But wow, the curve collapsed. The yields collapsed and the stock market went up. So is it possible that happens again? Yeah. I'm not talking about significantly changing the fiscal picture in the short term, but the prospects of a better fiscal scenario could bring rates down and stock market up. And then you have the Brazilians allocating more to equities. And the gringos too, as they say.
They go together. We'll get to politics in a second, but I wanted to ask you something on this, to continue this subject for a second. Was there was a period like between 215 and 220 or so where It seems like every Brazilian I knew was buying a place in Miami or Portugal or Madrid or Milan. And still, like when I talk to people of my generation, our generation, the amount of Brazilians that have left the country and are living in all these places, and really with no intention of going back except for vacations, is quite remarkable. Is that just the very rich are doing that, and why are they doing that? And
Yeah, it's not, unfortunately, not only the very rich, is people middle class, and it's a very sad thing. You and I, Jean, remember that in the 90s, you would see a diaspora of Argentines in the US, but Brazilians, you will see a lot less, a lot less. But today, the Brazilians, and you see more, because now obviously I'm a dad, and I have I might be a granddad soon, maybe, right? I'm closer to being a granddad. That's what I meant. But you see the newest generation, a lot of the kids from upper middle class have gone out a lot more, scale of magnitude more than when I came to the US to do business school. I was one of a few. Today is common, to move out, and even in the lower classes also to try Canada or Australia, or I have family members in Canada, family members in Australia. It's incredible, the brain drain and the lack of opportunities. The economy hasn't grown for 40 plus years. I mean, that's the bottom line. Brazilian economy has had a very mediocre, below mediocre growth rate for 40 years. The average growth rate has been extremely low. And then you don't have the opportunities. Plus, you have a migration to lower quality service jobs, and jobs in the manufacturing sector that are more value added have gone down. So the Brazilian economy is a different nature, right? And now it's all about energy and food. So the opportunities are small. That what your impression is right on. That's exactly my impression too. It has happened. There's a Brazilian diaspora now, probably a younger generation than me, but it's a big one.
yeah, so Brazil is one of the world cases of most intense de-industrialization. And I think Brazil today has gone back to like levels of 1950 in terms of dependency on exports of commodities. So first, it's a huge change, because I remember the first time when I went to Brazil, like the stock market was full of capital goods companies, and
Yeah.
and today it's just all services, right? Everything's a service.
It's a retail, beer, became like
Retail,
then
hospitals,
energy,
banks, yeah.
banks.
So tell us what do you think of how can this be changed? What do you think of the prospects for the economy? What would be needed to get Brazil back on track?
Listen, I just said minutes ago that I am optimistic about the Brazilian stock market, and I am for the reasons that I mentioned. I think that if we see a declining in interest rates, or a more government or more fiscal responsibility, stock market can do well. And there is a lot of opportunity in Brazil. There's always been a huge opportunities that have scale to become monetized, and for Brazil to explore those opportunities in the energy sector. For instance, these are obvious. Not only energy, oil and gas, but energy, solar, wind. Brazil could be it could be a bigger player in energy. Energy is becoming important in the world more and more, and Brazil has enormous potential there, but it doesn't monetize that potential. Look like Venezuela, right? It has huge oil reserves, but it's a very poor country, as your guest mentioned before, a couple of weeks ago. So Brazil has all these great things, but to fix the other things, right? Brazil has this chronic capital misallocation problem. I think Brazil is a poster child of capital misallocation. It does a phenomenal job in putting a lot of capital in the wrong places and not enough capital in the other places. They have this culture of dirigism mentality of, I don't know, a little mix of socialism with focus on income distribution and not on growth. And not that income distribution is not important, but I mean, like, you don't grow, right? There is no opportunity. So, and the capital is poorly deployed. So I think we need, and it is a lot of assistentialism. So all of these things make Brazil a difficult case. When you think about longer term, it's difficult to be optimistic with Brazil. It's difficult because the structural elements there are, we don't see, especially during Lula years, we didn't see any prospect of a significant change. It's almost like what Brazil wants to be is wrong. It's not. So Brazil is like solving for a bad. It's a bad plan. That's not the way to go, Brazil, right? So focus on a lot of assistentialism. Yeah, there's a lot of poor people in Brazil. So what do? We tax and give them money. But yeah, do we fix the problems of education, of sanitation? No, those we don't. But we do give them a lot of money. Then buy a new TV. That's classic PT style, fomenting consumption and not investment. Taking the state growing. There is a study by Alex Schwartzman. We probably should follow them. But Alex was saying that debt to GDP in Brazil now, government expenses to GDP properly accounted is 47%. 47%. It was 32. So Brazil is a higher than OECD level. It's probably second to France. Other than that, but worse than France, this 47% of GDP are being given to a guy who is a horrible capital allocator, right? So and if you ask Lula what he plans to do, he wants more. He wants to go from 47 to 48, hopefully to 52. So you say, wow, why are you doing that? So that makes me very negative with not with the opportunity sets, but with the way you go. Brazil is under bad management for a long time, and there is this culture now that kind of a mentality that fixes on the wrong problems. Right? Brazil has a problem of capital allocation, has a problem with education, sanitation, energy, transportation, and those things are not addressed properly. They are because they want the government to be. The government wants to raise capital for the government to solve the problem instead of allowing a third party to go there and do it. Right. So slowly we are seeing progress in sanitation after God knows 100+ years of doing nothing. We are seeing sanitation moving, but first we had to be worse than India in terms of sanitation for the for the Brazilians to realize that, hey, maybe we should address that. Instead of giving credit for a poor person to buy a TV, maybe we should connect their house to a sanitation system. It's probably better. But the consensus is not there yet. A lot of people think that this dirigism, the state should be the driver, and there is this misconception. I want to mention this to you guys. There's this guy from PT, which is one of the key guys from the Workers' Party, from the PT. He insists in saying, José Dirceu, his name, and he insists in saying that Brazil is a rich country. Brazil is a rich country, but we are our richness is not well spread. He says that to Congress. I mean, this is a country where the average compensation is 3,000 reais per month, which is kind of a ridiculously low. The country is obviously poor, but and needs to grow and has opportunities to do so, but continue to focus in a lot of the countries. So I think that's going to be hard to change, especially with the political system that we have in place. It's hard to change. So I have this half of me very positive in the short to medium term, because I think the outlook for lower rates could make the EWZ to be back to 40 or 50 or 60, okay? Not to 100, that is the all-time high. Brazilians think, oh, the stock market is doing all-time record. Well, all-time record in dollar terms is 100, right? And today, EWZ, let me
It's
see.
one third of the way.
It needs to triple. It needs to triple the stock to get to all-time high.
Do you think that any bullish scenario is purely on hopes of the right wing taking power, or not?
Well, in my opinion, there is no. I don't think that with PT you're going to have more of the same, which is the more likely scenario, right? The surveys indicate that Lula is running ahead. The more likely scenario have more of the same: this mediocrity, low growth, a lot of assistantialism. I don't know why Lula would change. He always been like that, and it seems like he's becoming more so that way. There is no plan for Brazil, right? There is no. Lula is not a guy who likes to reform things. I'm really pro reform. I mean, if it were. I'm almost becoming a revolutionary, because I'm not, but I'm almost becoming a revolutionary because the reforms have died with Cardoso. Since then, we have had very little reforms. We had some good things, I think, just to not to forget to say the good things that have happened in Brazil that I think are worth noticing. One is the central bank independence. That is institutionally a very positive thing. And the fact that there was this test now with Lula of the central bank, I think it's being approved with flying colors for emerging markets, central bank to behave like that. If you compare to Turkey and others, Brazil is great. The other thing that was positive for Brazil is Brazil now doesn't have an external problem. The Brazilian problem is not in dollars. The Brazilian problem is in reais. If you look at the external sector, the current account, the financing of the current account, that is very solvable. Brazil doesn't have a lot of external debt, the exports have grown. So all that volatility, Argentina style volatility, that is probably something from the past, and it has been a big development. That is. It's a huge accomplishment. But again, it was accomplished 30 years ago, back at the end of the Cardoso years. Yeah. So those things are really accomplishments, things that the Brazilians have conquered. But other than that, the institutional weakness, the legal mess that we're seeing, the destruction of a lot of the all the institutions that were supposed to, regulatory institutions, etc., have been negative, unfortunately. So
Luis, until recently, I think Argentina looked pretty bad, and the perspective was more of the same. And all of a sudden, you have Milei has come, and Cast in Chile also, I think, has a big reform agenda. Is that possible in Brazil, to have a Milei figure come out of the woodwork and all of a sudden convince the voters?
Asked a lot that question. I think a person like Milei, yes, but the difficulty in Brazil is because in Brazil the state is a lot bigger. The state relative to the size of the economy, and the institutional ties. Not institutional, but the constitutional ties are a lot stronger. So if you had Milei in Brazil, just an exercise of thinking, right? Let's just think about this. It's very hard, for instance, for you to cut public employees. You can't. It's not about willingness. It's impossible. Right? Marcos Lisboa mentions that all the time. You can't reduce salaries. You can't fire employees. Why? Because the Constitution doesn't allow you to. So there is a lot. It's a lot harder to be a Milei in Brazil than it is to be a Milei in Argentina. You have to be more of a gradual guy, have a little bit more of a gradual approach to accomplish the same thing. But just not only Argentina is better, but Argentina had a pope and Argentina has a lot better soccer team than Brazil does, which hurts the self-esteem of Brazilians a lot.
Good point.
And they are now invading the south of Brazil because our currency is too cheap relative to the peso.
Florianopolis has become an Argentine colony.
Yeah, it's total humiliation. It's not a good time.
Yeah. So how do you see the election, and what can happen on the right to bring forth a good candidate that can convince the voters? How do you see that?
Yeah, right is a mess, right? The obvious candidate, or let's say the obvious is more like most liked candidate was Tarcísio de Freitas, right, the governor of São Paulo, which is a kind of more of a go-getter, doer kind of guy, not a born and bred politician. He's more of a technocrat, but a good technocrat, and has had good results working for the Dilma government, working for the Bolsonaro government, and working as a governor of São Paulo. So he has a very good track record of accomplishments, of deliveries. He's doing very well, and it's. But the problem with the right, the anti-Lula spectrum, right, is that you have Bolsonaro has been essentially kicked out of the race. Not that he doesn't deserve so, he probably more than deserves so, but they did it in a completely legal way. They broke a lot of, there was an elephant in a china shop, right? There was the legal system in Brazil broke a lot of golden rules, and it committed a lot of huge mistakes to accomplish something that could have been accomplished by the rule of law. So, and that has essentially created a vicious fight, because some people from the right were kind of benefiting to have Bolsonaro out to take his place and get his votes. So, and the Bolsonaro side saw that, so there was a little bit of a intra-right war that essentially broke the right in two camps. One, the Bolsonarista camp, and the other one, for lack of a better name, let's call the center right. Right, but the center right has less votes than the Bolsonaro. Right, so what we are likely to see is going to the second round or going to the election with the Lula being almost like certain to go to the second round. So I would say 99% certainty, and then on the other side you would have a Bolsonarista candidate, which is stronger in numbers. In numbers, is stronger factually, but it's not the best candidate. And the best candidate, instead of getting together and being one separate, and that one will unlikely go to the second round. And the governor of São Paulo, that was likely to be that guy, saying, you know what, I don't like this. I wanted to be supported by the Bolsonaro, so I better be governor of São Paulo again. So, long story short, the most likely scenario for the election in Brazil, as it stands today, is to have Lula against Flávio Bolsonaro, which is a Bolsonaro with a little bit of water mixed in it, right? So you take a shot of Bolsonaro, put 30% of water mix. That's Flávio Bolsonaro. It's a diluted down version of the father, and it's very. And as of now, Lula is favorite, despite the fact that he has huge rejection rates. So it's still a long time to do. We have to do another one of these closer to the election to analyze. But today, this most likely scenario is going to be Lula against a Bolsonarista, Flávio Bolsonaro, in the second round.
Is there any possibility of someone coming out of the woodwork? I mean, are there any potential candidates that nobody's talking about that you're saying possibly if this guy comes out? Anybody?
Yeah, so there is a lot of guys trying to play exactly that role, right? So you have this Ratinho Jr., which is a well-regarded politician. kind of a center right and tries to take this middle of the road approach. You have on the center left, Ciro Gomes, unlikely, but there's also another guy. There's Caiado, a little more towards the right. They're all trying to be that I'm not Bolsonaro, I'm anti-Lula, I'm the guy. But the polls don't show them with a lot of votes. And that, I think, is a mistake that I was kind of I've been fighting with a friend of mine for, because I thought the strategy of the right was very wrong in trying to support the legal system to jail Bolsonaro at any cost. Because I thought if you do that, the Bolsonaristas are not going to support you later on. And this is exactly what's happening, right? So the Brazilians they have this authoritarian vein, both the right and the left, and the legal system too, which I don't know if you follow closely, but I mean, it's not. I'm not questioning the things that Bolsonaro did or did not do. Okay, that I think you should pay and go to pay for that. But the process of putting the process that was done to put Bolsonaro in jail was a legal joke. It was absurd. They have broken every single constitutional legal norm possible to accomplish the objective. And when you do that so obviously, we've seen what happened in the U.S., right? When they were trying too hard to to jail Trump, and it makes the guy stronger. So there is a little bit of that in Brazil going on, right? That's why it's helping the Bolsonaristas.
How does the whole issue like of Trump and the Don Rowe doctrine, how is that perceived in Brazil?
Well, I think consensus is that he has at least initially helped Lula a lot, right? Because of the, but I'm kind of starting with the tariffs, right, which now are 8 months ago, more or less, right? March, April. Okay, at that point, Lula really wrapped himself in the Brazilian flag and played as Brazil was being unfairly treated and so on and so forth. And he accomplished a lot and got more, got a lot of votes, of more intentional votes. So he has helped more. And especially so because Bolsonaro and Bolsonaro's son more or less supported that thing, because they were essentially wanted almost obsessively go against the judicial system in Brazil. So they failed miserably, and Lula won. So, but that is the story 6 months ago. Well, as things have progressed with Venezuela news is not good news for Lula, right? First, because it and Lula is obviously, clearly very linked to Iran, to Venezuela, etc. So as the focus shifts in Venezuela, that hurts Lula. That really does hurt Lula, and because he's known as being so right now he's. I saw the polls today indicate that Lula's rejection rates are increasing, and negative view on Lula increases. So so that the good time of the terrorists for Lula are behind, and now from an election perspective is harder. But in terms of Brazil, I think Brazil has this lack of. Brazil has this very unique thing about trying to be like India. I'm not here, not there, right? But it doesn't articulate that well. It doesn't articulate that well. It articulates more like I'm anti-US, especially the PT government. So instead of creating an India-like distance between the sides, no, it goes very much towards the side of anti-US, almost systematically. Lula is systematically anti-US. It's a mentality that I don't know where it comes from, or maybe I do, but it's a long story, and that is creating vulnerabilities. Right today, apparently there was announcing of the visas for Brazilians are going to be harder to get for Brazilians to visit the U.S. There is no love lost between him and
Yeah.
the Department of State, right? I forgot the name.
Rubio, yeah.
Rubio.
Yeah, because Lula, I mean, his affinity for China and for that whole axis is well known. That's a big problem. So, but it's a bigger problem every day. How's he going to deal with that?
Yeah, I think I don't know how he's going to deal with that. It's harder for him. It's harder for him to position. Brazil has a very bad foreign policy, a little bit of a reactive and thoughtless, because it was always like anti-dollar, pro-Putin. They are for the worst possible partners Brazil has chosen. So if you compare to Argentina, which you can say, well, is a little bit of a lapdog of the U.S., but it aligns a lot better with a side, right? And Brazil has tried to become India, and he ended up becoming Iran friend. It's not it's not very good. So they are really trying hard now not through the government, but the biggest accomplishments were done to this guy from the beef company. Do you know what I'm talking? The JBS guy, who essentially tried to act as an ambassador and trying to get deals with the White House, which was how he accomplished things. The guy is, you know who he is. So it's really, really bad. Listen, this Lula government, I know some people like him. I don't. I think it was a disgrace for the country. Very weakened institutions, no growth. He has turned the politics more polarized, brought very little of institutional or the place in Brazil in the world. Or we all know this. Do you remember in the 90s how much Brazil was was percentage of the MSCI EM? Do you remember?
Yeah, sure. I think it peaked like at 14, 15%, no?
Yeah, it was over 15%.
Yeah.
Today it's like 4%.
Yeah.
In EM, right? It's just a tragedy. It was a tragedy. Very bad government.
I remember when Chinese GDP passed Brazil, I think it was like
1990.
92, 93 or something. And I said, oh, this is just temporary, this is not going to last. Now China is like 4 times the size of Brazil.
No, India was smaller than the state of São Paulo. India is now 3 times the GDP of Brazil, 2.5 times.
Yeah, poor Brazil is like stuck in a time warp.
Yeah, and it is a reluctance to grow, right? This reluctance to grow, this miscapital allocation, growing the size of the state. So these are all solvable problems.
It's like Europe, but Europe doesn't have that many poor people. It's Europe with a lot of poor people.
Yeah, and we make a very generous welfare state. So Brazil wants to have a very generous welfare state, a very large state, being poor. So it's complicated, but this is what every Brazilian that has a heart thinks of. The good thing is that a lot of these Brazilian problems are fixable. These are not things that are structurally bad, right? That they will never ever going to improve. You could improve a lot of these things if you marginally improve the capital allocation. If you marginally allow the private sector to decide on where to allocate capital, instead of doing all these tax laws that forces you to build a bicycle in Manaus and then bring to São Paulo back and then ship to Manaus. Instead of doing those things, if you allow the market to work a little bit more.
Luiz, perhaps we can conclude here. If you could tell us, what are you telling your clients in terms of like global investments, global positioning right now?
I think that the 26 is likely to be similar to 25 from a point of view of market. I think the dollar is more likely than not to continue on the weakish side, which will help international investments. So we've seen Japan, Korea breaking records. Europe is doing well. From a performance point of view, emerging markets did well. Brazil did well. I think and something that I heard from Yuja, that say the best scenario for EM is when the US, the economy is more or less stable, which is what we have. 26 is likely, the 26 scenario for the US is very good, right? I'd be wrong, but today is like 2.5%. The market doesn't rally very strongly in the US, right? And the dollar is weakening. That's exactly what we have. So I think the scenario for EM is very positive. So I like EM and I like international in general. And I think the US, I'm more optimistic with the economy than with the market. I think the economy is, listen, with inflation is the big uncertainty, right? Especially after the tariffs. But now that the effect of the tariffs are pretty much behind us, let's see what the Supreme Court decides. But the effect of the tariffs are behind us. Then you have two big things. You have energy prices, oil prices down, and you have rents finally down. And those are important components. So bringing inflation slightly towards the target of 2% will allow the Fed to cut a little bit more. And the economy it's okay. Less employment, that's not bad. You've seen the last number for labor productivity was incredible, 4.9%. I don't know how much of this is AI, but hey, chance of recession is lower today than it was in the beginning of 2025. So I'm positive on the economy. The market is too expensive. Everything has run a lot, right? What do you think? What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm not as bullish on the economy as I think the underlying move in AI, the spending is too much of the economy. I think that's going to slow down, not because AI is going away, because I have an AI company, but I believe that that as enterprises begin to implement, they're not going to use the giant models and have to search trillions of websites. It's a different type of business model where it will take less energy, or much less energy than what everyone believes. So I think that the AI spending is going to collapse on its own, not because of regulation or anything else, and that's going to naturally just the U.S. economy is not going to collapse, but we have some really big problems here with the consumer is over leveraged. We have massive debt. And as I said, if the AI spending is that much of this 5% growth, that's going to begin to wane because enterprises are not having a good return on investment on all this spending on the implementation of Copilot and these models. They're just not working. So
it's crazy. It's crazy how much capital is going to AI, right? And I agree. A lot of the financing of the AI also poses a risk, right? Because a lot of it's in the market, right? I don't know if it's high yield or whatever it is, but it's a lot of debt of AI.
Luis, it goes back to, again, this is a great place to stop because it goes back to the original parts of our conversation. You were living in a world of telecom spending, internet infrastructure, which we had to have. But the economic value of all that for the companies that got all that was terrible. Their return was terrible. It's the same thing here. So as opposed to what's Verizon? Verizon is Gemini. Verizon is Anthropic, right? They're just getting billions of dollars building out these great models, which we need and everyone else needs. But in the end, who's going to benefit? It's the people like, for example, Salesforce that can take those models and just use open source and implement, where OpenAI does not have the connections with the enterprise. They just have these big models. So again, they're the Verizons, they're the AT&Ts, these giant models.
Very good point.
OpenAI. That's a great way to end, because you started with that whole idea, and we're ending with we're in the same scenario, right?
We're ending on a pessimistic note.
Listen, Luis, it was awesome
for emerging markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, this was great, and we wish you the best of luck, and on continue to grow your company. Because we're always trying to grow.
Guys, and great initiative. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis.
Thank you.